My dad threw me out of the house, and I learned what family actually was. When my dad found out I was pregnant, he didn't care that it was a man twice my age who forced himself on me. All he saw was a slot. He threw me out in the snow in the middle of the night. I was 16 and I had no idea where to go. I spent the night in the park bathroom trying not to freeze to death while touching my stomach and thinking about this baby I never wanted. Missy Nyla found me the next morning sleeping in the school bathroom because I couldn't stay in the park after what happened with those men who kept circling back. She was my English teacher who always said I could write my way out of this town if I just kept believing in myself. She took one look at my garbage bags and I completely broke down. I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. "You're coming home with me," she said, and I collapsed against her because nobody had hugged me since that night and I needed someone to tell me I wasn't disgusting. She canceled her classes and drove me to her house. I cried the whole way because kindness felt so foreign. Miss Anna lived alone in a house full of books and cats that wouldn't leave my stomach alone like they could sense the life inside. She made me a bedroom in her office and came to every doctor's appointment where nurses assumed she was my mother and we never corrected them. At night, she'd hold my hair during morning sickness and tell me about her wife Marina, who died 3 years ago. They'd tried for kids for a decade but ran out of time. "Maybe, you're both my second chance," she whispered while I threw up again, and I sobbed because this stranger was being the mother mine refused to be. We fell into a routine where she watched me do online school while I helped grade papers. Slowly my belly grew, and so did this feeling that maybe I could love this baby even though I hated how it started. She'd put her hand on my stomach and tell the baby about all the books they'd read together, and all the places they'd see. And I started believing we could actually do this. When Oliver was born, Miss Nyla held my hand through 19 hours of labor, while I screamed and begged for my mother, who never came. My parents ignored every call from the hospital. She cut his cord and was the first to hold him after me. We both cried when he grabbed her finger with his tiny, perfect hand. "Can he call you Grandma?" I asked, and she sobbed yes while kissing his tiny head. We went home together and built this strange, beautiful life in her little house. She taught him songs in different languages, while I taught him to laugh at my silly faces. He took his first steps, reaching for her glasses because they sparkled in the light. He said Mama to me and Nana to her, and I finally understood that family was about choosing each other every single day. We were happy in a way I never thought possible after everything that happened. My father showed up when Oliver was 2 after my cousin posted a photo of us at the park without my permission. He stood on the porch in his expensive suit saying Mom was dying of guilt and wanted to meet her grandson. "Come home and apologized for the shame you caused and maybe we can work something out." He said like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Miss Anna stepped between us and told him to leave before she called the police about child abandonment. "That's my daughter you're interfering with," he screamed while Oliver cried and clung to my legs, terrified of this angry stranger. "She became my daughter the day you threw her away," Ms. Nyla said in that voice that could silence any classroom full of teenagers. My father's face went purple with rage. He pointed at her and screamed that she was a predator taking advantage of vulnerable girls, and he'd make sure everyone knew what she really was. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but Mr. Orna just smiled and said, "Everyone already knows I'm the woman who saved your daughter when you failed her." The next morning, Miss Nyla didn't come to breakfast, and my heart knew something was wrong before my brain did. I found her on her bedroom floor clutching her chest and gasping my name like she needed to tell me something important. The paramedics worked on her for 40 minutes while she kept trying to reach for me. Oliver kept asking why Nana wouldn't wake up, and why her face looked so gray. I begged them to try harder because she's the only family we've ever had. She survived but at the hospital, had to be put on life support where the machines were doing all the breathing and pumping. "She made you medical proxy last year," the doctor said, showing me papers while my hands shook too hard to read them. "She doesn't want extraordinary measures, so you need to decide soon whether to continue life support." I held her hand while Oliver played with her fingers, not understanding why she wouldn't squeeze back like she always did during their morning game. I kept whispering, "Please don't leave us." The machines wouldn't stop their beeping, while I squeezed Missy Nyla's cold hand harder. Oliver kept tugging on her fingers the way he did every morning when they played their counting game. The doctor stood by the foot of her bed holding a clipboard and watching me with this patient look. Oliver pulled on my shirt, asking why Nana wouldn't sing the good morning song she always sang to him. My throat closed up because yesterday she was standing on our porch telling my father off with her teacher voice. Now her face looked gray, like old newspaper, and the machines were doing all her breathing. The doctor cleared his throat and moved closer to show me some papers on his clipboard. His finger pointed to Miss Nyla's signature at the bottom while he explained I was her medical proxy. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hold the clipboard steady enough to read the words. The paper said something about no extraordinary measures in her neat teacher handwriting that I'd seen on hundreds of my essays. He told me we didn't have to decide right away, but we should honor what she wanted. Oliver started crying because he was hungry and scared of all the beeping sounds. A woman walked in with a soft voice and introduced herself as Constance Parker, the social worker. She had this thick folder under her arm and suggested we go somewhere quieter to talk. She found us a small room down the hall with some toys for Oliver to play with. While he stacked blocks, she explained what being a medical proxy meant and handed me pamphlets about hospital services. Her calm way of talking made my chest loosen just a little bit. She said she'd be here to help us through everything, and wrote her number on a card. Dr. Wesley Wong knocked and came in to explain what happened to Miss Nyla's heart and brain. He sat down across from me and used his hands to show how her heart stopped pumping blood for 40 minutes. The paramedics got it started again, but her brain went without oxygen for too long. He wanted to run more tests tomorrow to check her brain function better. Oliver kept pulling on my sleeve, asking when we could go back to Nana's house for lunch. Dr. Atwong's face stayed gentle while he warned me that 40 minutes without oxygen usually meant bad damage. The ICU had rules about kids not being allowed, but the nurses let Oliver stay. He wouldn't eat his crackers unless he could see Nana and kept crying every time we tried to leave. I had to keep him busy with coloring books while doctors kept coming in with more information. Constance said she could arrange volunteers to watch Oliver during important meetings if I needed. That night I sat in the hard plastic chair next to Miss Nyla's bed holding Oliver. He finally fell asleep, against my chest with his thumb in his mouth. I kept thinking about that first night 3 years ago when she brought me to her house. She made me chamomile tea and let me cry for hours without asking any questions. She just kept saying, "You're safe now," over and over until I finally believed her. Now I was the one whispering those same words to her still body under all the tubes. Oliver shifted in my sleep, and I realized we were basically orphans without her. The fear from yesterday kept washing over me in waves that made my hands shake. My father's purple face screaming that Ms. Nyla was a predator kept playing in my head. His threat to tell everyone what she really was made my stomach twist into knots. Constance must have noticed my breathing getting weird because she asked if there were safety concerns. I told her about my father showing up yesterday and what he said about Miss Nyla. She wrote something on her clipboard and said she'd put a note in the system right away. That night, after Oliver finally went to sleep on the little cot they brought, I read Miss Nyla's papers. The advance directive spelled out everything in legal words about ventilators and feeding tubes. My eyes kept getting blurry reading the part that said, "No artificial life. Support if there's no hope." She'd written a personal note at the bottom in blue pen. It said she watched Marina suffer on machines for 3 weeks and never wanted that. The weight of everything crashed down on me all at once in the hallway. I couldn't breathe and my chest felt like someone was sitting on it. Constance found me bent over by the vending machines gasping for air. She showed me how to breathe in for 4 counts and hold it. She kept her hand on my back, saying I wasn't alone in this. She gave me a paper about grief that I shoved in my pocket without reading. The next morning this older woman named Betty showed up wearing a volunteer vest. She said she could take Oliver to the playroom while I met with the doctors. I didn't want to let him go with someone I didn't know, but I needed to actually hear what the doctors were saying without him pulling on me. Betty had this soft grandmother way about her that Oliver seemed to like. He grabbed his favorite book that Nana always read him about the hungry caterpillar. Betty promised they'd read it together and maybe do some puzzles. I watched them walk down the hall with my heart pounding, but I had to trust her. Constance was already waiting for me in a small meeting room down the hall with papers spread across the table and a man in a wrinkled button-down shirt sitting next to her. He stood up when I walked in and stuck out his hand, while Constance explained, "This was Dave Gutierrez from Legal Aid, who could help me understand everything." His handshake was firm but gentle, and he had these deep lines around his eyes that made him look like someone who'd seen enough hard stuff to not judge anyone. He pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in notes and started going through the basics of medical proxy authority, while I kept glancing at the door, worried about Oliver. Dave explained that my job wasn't to decide what I wanted for Miss Nyla, but to make the choices she would make for herself based on what she'd told me and written down. He showed me copies of the advance directive again, and walked through each section slowly while I tried to focus on the words, instead of the way my chest kept getting tighter. When I asked about my father and whether he could take Oliver, Dave's whole face changed and he leaned forward with his elbows on the table. He said my father had absolutely zero legal claim to Oliver since he'd thrown me out when I was pregnant and never established any relationship with his grandson. Medical proxy designation was ironclad too, since Miss Nyla had done everything properly with witnesses, and notarization. He mentioned there might be estate issues if something happened to Miss Nyla, but we'd handle that when we needed to. The relief hit me so hard I started sobbing right there in that little room while Dave pushed a box of tissues across the table, and Constance rubbed my back. After I pulled myself together, I told Dave I needed another opinion on Miss Nyla's brain function before I could even think about making any decisions. He nodded and said that was completely reasonable and actually showed I was taking my responsibilities seriously. We walked back to the ICU, where Dr. Wong was checking Miss Nyla's monitors, and I asked him directly for a second neurological assessment. He didn't hesitate or act annoyed, just said he understood completely and would schedule it for tomorrow morning with their best neurologist. He even said I was being thorough and responsible, which made me feel slightly less like I was drowning in decisions I wasn't old enough to make. Oliver came running back from the playroom with Betty holding a picture he'd drawn of him and Nana reading books together. He climbed into my lap and asked if the doctors were going to fix Nana's broken head, while pointing at all the machines around her bed. I told him they were trying their best, while Betty quietly slipped out with a gentle squeeze to my shoulder. The next morning started with my phone ringing before Oliver even woke up. The woman on the other end said she was from the school district's HR department, and they'd received a complaint about inappropriate conduct between MS and Nyla and a student. My whole body went cold because I knew immediately this was my father trying to destroy her even while she was dying. The HR lady sounded skeptical and kept saying things like, "We have to investigate any complaint and this is just procedure," but I could tell she thought it was garbage. She said someone would need to come interview me at some point. But for now, they were just doing preliminary fact-finding. I hung up and wanted to throw the phone across the room, but Oliver was stirring in his hospital cot. That afternoon, everything got worse when Oliver's forehead felt hot during lunch, and he started crying that his tummy hurt. The ICU nurse checked his temperature and it was 1014, which meant we needed to go to the pediatric emergency department right away. I had to leave Miss Nyla alone with all her machines while I carried Oliver down 3 floors to pediatrics, where they made us wait 40 minutes before a doctor could see us. Oliver kept crying for Nana to kiss his forehead and make the always go away like she always did when he was sick. The pediatric nurses were kind but busy, and it took forever for them to determine it was just a mild virus, probably from stress in the hospital environment. They gave him some medicine for the fever and told me to keep him hydrated while I sat there torn between needing to be with him and desperately wanting to be back with Nyla. We made it back to the ICU by evening, where Dr. Wong was waiting with another doctor I hadn't met before. They'd done the second neurological exam that morning while I was dealing with Oliver's fever, and now they had the results. Dr. Wong's face told me everything before he even opened his mouth, but he still explained carefully that the tests showed significant anoxic brain injury with minimal brain activity. Requested reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The other doctor showed me the scans on his tablet and pointed to all the dark areas where Missy Nyla's brain tissue had been damaged from lack of oxygen. He said there was no possibility of recovery from this level of injury, and her brainstem was only maintaining basic functions because of the machines. The words hit me like physical punches, but I appreciated that they weren't giving me false hope. Constance appeared beside me and said she'd scheduled a family meeting for tomorrow morning with the whole care team to discuss goals of care and next steps. She explained this was standard procedure when families were facing these kinds of decisions, and everyone would be there to support whatever choice I made for Mr. Nyla. That night I sat next to Miss Nyla's bed, holding her hand, while Oliver slept fitfully in his cot, still warm from the fever. I told her about his temperature and how he kept asking for her kisses, and about the stupid HR complaint that we both knew was my father's doing. I pulled out a notebook from my bag and started writing her a letter with all the things I'd never gotten to say properly. The words came out messy and tear-stained, but I wrote about how she saved my life that morning in the school bathroom and became the mother I'd needed. I wrote about how Oliver would always know his Nana was the bravest woman who chose us when nobody else would. My voice cracked and broke as I read it out loud to her still form, while Oliver colored with crayons on the floor beside us. 2 of Miss Nyla's teaching colleagues showed up quietly with a cardboard box while I was reading. They didn't say much, just squeezed my shoulder and left the box on the chair before slipping out. Inside were dozens of cards from her students and fellow teachers with messages about how much she meant to them. Oliver got excited seeing all the colorful drawings and started pulling them out one by one to look at the pictures. Dave came back that afternoon with more papers and a serious expression. He said, given my father's escalating harassment with the confrontation and now the HR complaint, we needed to file for a no-contact order immediately. He'd already started the paperwork and showed me where to sign while explaining that the pattern of behavior would make judges take this seriously. I signed everywhere he pointed while Oliver played with Dave's pen cap, grateful someone with a clear head was thinking about protecting us, when I could barely think straight at all. Constance came back while Dave was still sorting papers and saw me staring at the hospital billing statement that had already started arriving. The numbers made my stomach drop because even one day in the ICU cost more than I'd ever seen in my life. She sat down next to me and pulled out a different folder, explaining that the hospital had charity care programs for situations exactly like mine. We spent the next hour filling out forms while Oliver played with the buttons on the hospital bed, with Constance helping me list my tiny income from online tutoring and showing me where to write that I had zero savings. She kept reassuring me that Miss Nyla's insurance would cover most of the medical costs and the hospital wouldn't let me drown in debt over this. The relief made me cry again because I'd been imagining losing everything on top of losing her. That evening, my phone started blowing up with notifications from people I hadn't talked to since high school. Someone showed me my father's post on the town's Facebook community page where he'd written this long thing calling Missy Nyla a predator who groomed vulnerable girls. He said she'd taken advantage of me when I was homeless and pregnant, twisting everything good she'd done into something sick. The comments were already piling up, with some people defending her as the best teacher they'd ever had, while others who didn't know her were buying his lies and calling for investigations. I wanted to type out the truth about how she saved us, but Dave grabbed my phone and said absolutely not. He explained that anything I posted could be used against us later, and we needed to stay quiet for legal reasons, even though it killed me to see her name dragged through mud while she lay dying. The next morning, we had the big care meeting that Constance had scheduled with the whole medical team. The conference room was full of doctors and nurses, and this woman who introduced herself as the hospital ethics consultant. She had this calm way of talking that made me feel less crazy as she explained quality of life and suffering and what it meant to honor someone's wishes. She pulled out Missy Nyla's advance directive again and read the parts where Miss Nyla specifically said she didn't want machines keeping her alive if there was no hope. The consultant helped me understand that keeping her on life support when she explicitly didn't want it wasn't love, but actually disrespecting what she believed in. By the end of the meeting, I was sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, but I finally understood what I had to do. Even though every part of me wanted to keep her here forever, that night was the worst yet because Oliver had nightmares and kept waking up, screaming for Nana to check under the bed for monsters. He'd started sucking his thumb again, which he hadn't done since he was barely 1, and it broke my heart watching him go backward. I held him tight in the narrow hospital cot while he cried and kept asking why Nana wouldn't wake up to sing their special song that kept bad dreams away. All I could do was rock him and whisper that Nana loved him even when she was sleeping, which made him cry harder because he knew something was really wrong, even if he couldn't understand what. The next day, Dave said we needed to go to Miss Nyla's house to look for important documents before anything happened. Driving there felt wrong without her in the passenger seat. Telling Oliver to spot red cars like they always did, walking through her front door with the key she'd given me made me feel like a thief. Even though she'd said 1,000 times that her house was our house too. The smell hit me first, that mix of lavender lotion and old books that meant safety for 3 years. Her coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table next to the stack of essays she'd been grading with her reading glasses on top like she'd just stepped out for a minute. Oliver ran straight to his toy box in the living room and started pulling out all the blocks Nana had bought him for his birthday. While I stood frozen, unable to move, Dave gently pushed me toward her home office, saying we needed to find insurance papers and bank statements and anything else important. In her office, I found this big binder on the desk labeled important documents in her perfect teacher handwriting with tabs for everything. Insurance policies, bank accounts, the house deed, all organized with sticky notes explaining what each thing was like. She knew I'd need help understanding it all. At the very back was a sealed envelope with my name written on the front that made my hands shake so bad I could barely open it. Inside was this long letter in her handwriting talking about how Oliver and I had become the children she and Marina always dreamed of having. She wrote about how that morning she found me in the school bathroom was the day her life started making sense again after Marina died. She said watching me become a mother, despite everything that happened, had been the greatest privilege of her life. The letter ended with her saying she knew I was strong enough to take care of Oliver no matter what happened, and that she'd always be proud of her daughter, even if the law didn't recognize it that way. I sat on her office floor sobbing while Oliver played in the next room, clutching this letter that felt like goodbye. Dave sat down next to me and started going through the binder page by page, explaining what everything meant in simple terms I could understand. Miss Anna had left everything to me and Oliver in her will, but there was still a mortgage on the house from when she refinanced to pay for Marina's cancer treatment. He showed me the statements with all these medical debts and credit cards I never knew about because she never wanted us to worry about money. The probate process would take months, he said, and we might have to sell the house to pay everything off. The thought of losing her house on top of losing her felt like too much. But Dave said we'd figure it out one step at a time. Back at the hospital, Dr. Wong was waiting with a new proposal that made my chest tight. He wanted to reduce Missy Nyla's sedation tomorrow morning to do one final test for any response to stimulation. He was careful to explain this was just to be absolutely thorough and we shouldn't expect any improvement based on all the previous tests, but he understood I needed to know we'd tried everything possible before making the final decision. I agreed immediately because even though I knew what the outcome would be, I needed to see for myself that she really wasn't in there anymore. The test day came and they slowly reduced her medications, while Dr. Aong and 2 other doctors watched the monitors. Oliver sat on my lap playing with his toy car, making vrooming sounds while we waited for any sign that Miss Nyla could hear us. Dr. Aong called her name loudly and shined lights in her eyes and squeezed her nail beds to check for pain response. Her eyes stayed unfocused, staring at nothing even when he moved his hand in front of her face. He asked her to squeeze his hand and her fingers stayed limp. Her pupils didn't react right to the light, and there was no response to any of the painful stimuli they tried. After 30 minutes of testing, Dr. Wong put his hand on my shoulder and said what I already knew but needed to hear. There was no meaningful brain function left in Miss Nyla wasn't going to wake up. The machines were keeping her body alive, but she wasn't really there anymore. Oliver looked up from his car and asked if they fixed Nana yet, and I had to tell him no, while trying not to completely fall apart. That afternoon, Constance brought in this woman who specialized in grief counseling for young caregivers. We sat right there next to Miss Nyla's bed, while this counselor validated how impossible this whole situation was for someone my age. She said it was okay to feel angry and scared and overwhelmed all at the same time. She taught me this breathing technique where you count to 4 breathing in and hold it and count to 4 breathing out, which, actually, helped when I felt like I was going to pass out from panic. The counselor said anticipatory grief was just as real as regular grief and I wasn't weak for already mourning Miss Nyla even though she was still technically alive. She gave me permission to feel everything I was feeling without judgment and promised it was normal to wish someone else could make this decision for me. My phone rang while I was walking back to Miss Nyla's room and I almost didn't answer the unknown number. My mother's voice came through, small and broken, asking if it was true about Miss Nyla being in the hospital. She said she heard from my cousin who saw the Facebook posts and she wanted to see Oliver and maybe we could work something out. Her words mixed apologies with conditions about coming home if I'd just say sorry to Dad for the trouble I caused. She asked if we could meet somewhere without him knowing because he'd be so angry if he found out she called. The conversation made me want to throw my phone at the wall because even now she couldn't just be my mother without strings attached. I told her she could only meet Oliver if my father had nothing to do with it, and we'd meet in a public place with other people around. She agreed, but her voice shook with fear about going behind his back, and I realized she was still as trapped as I used to be before Ms. Edna saved me. We set up a meeting for next week at the park if she could get away without him. Noticing the HR person from the school called right after and said their investigation found nothing wrong, and lots of teachers wrote statements about how professional Miss Nyla always was. They were keeping the file open just for paperwork, but it was clear they saw through my father's lies completely. One tiny victory while everything else was falling apart around me. The next morning, a woman who worked with kids came to help Oliver understand what was happening to his Nana. She brought dolls and sat on the floor with him, showing how Nana's body was very sick and the machines were helping her breathe. Oliver watched her move the dolls around and seemed to get that Nana couldn't wake up, but he kept asking if she'd be better tomorrow. The woman was patient and kept explaining in simple words that sometimes bodies get too sick to get better. Oliver nodded, but I could see he didn't really understand because he kept looking at the door, waiting for Nana to walk in. That afternoon I took Oliver to the cemetery where Marina was buried because it felt like Ms. Nyla would want her to know what was happening. Oliver ran around picking dandelions while I sat by the headstone and told Marina that Miss Nyla might be coming to be with her soon. I explained how Miss Adela saved us and became our family, and how I didn't know how to let her go, even though I knew what she wanted. Oliver brought his handful of dandelions and put them on the stone, asking if Nana would play with this lady in heaven. I said yes through my tears, and held him tight while he waved bye to Marina's grave. Back at the hospital, Dr. Wong was waiting with his final report, and I knew from his face what he was going to say. He explained that keeping Miss Ayla on life support wasn't helping her, and went against everything she wrote in her papers about not wanting machines. He was gentle but clear that it was time to let her go, peacefully without more suffering. The weight of his words pressed down on me like something physical crushing my chest. That evening, I sat alone in Miss Nyla's room and opened her letter again while Oliver played with his cars on the floor. Her handwriting blurred through my tears as I read her words about not wanting to linger on machines and trusting me to make the right choice. She wrote about how proud she was of the mother I'd become, and how lucky Oliver was to have me. She gave me permission to let her go and said she'd always be watching over us, just like Marina watched over her. Every part of me wanted to keep her here, even if it was just her body breathing with machines, but I knew that wasn't what she wanted. Dave came by the next morning with papers for the restraining order against my father and said the court date was set for next month. He explained that the Facebook posts and the HR complaint showed a pattern that judges took seriously. The legal protection felt like Missy Nyla was still fighting for us even from her hospital bed. That same afternoon, my father showed up at the hospital trying to get in, but security stopped him at the door thanks to Constance's earlier warning. He made a huge scene demanding to see his grandson and screaming